Welcome to In Research. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. This is our first session of the year, and I'm so excited to see all these faces. We have a fantastic set of speakers lined up for you for the year ahead. The full schedule with speakers each month will be released on our website very shortly. This event is hosted by the Center for Academic Innovation and aims to act as a center for conversation, inspiration, and research to inform educational innovation of all kinds. If you have ideas for people that we should be inviting to come speak to us or join us for one of these, please send those my way. I am putting the URL for you to check out all of Academic Innovation's events in the chat for your reference. And I am thrilled today for us to be hearing from Dr. Nate Cradit, an outstanding research scientist at the Center for Academic Innovation. In his role, Nate leads and collaborates on empirical projects at the intersection of online learning, educational technology, post-secondary teaching, and the public good. Prior to joining us at the Center for Academic Innovation, Nate was the founding chair of the Higher Education Leadership Department at National Louis University, a private nonprofit university in Chicago, rooted in educational and social justice. And for today, we have long known that learners have many different motivations for engaging and learning via MOOCs, but we haven't really had a nuanced understanding of what makes them such effective learning experiences for different audiences. Nate's work is tremendously important as a step forward in starting to sense make this. Please join me in welcoming Nate Cradit.
All right, thanks, Kate. So thumbs up if you can see the screen. I'll assume you can. Cool. So, man, between the music and then the progressively graying sky, I feel like this is about to be the coziest research talk ever. So this is going to be a good afternoon. So thanks everyone for joining. As Kate said, we're talking today about MOOCs, massive open online courses, and the experiences that learners have had that we were able to learn about this spring. And so as a starting place for a little bit of level setting, what we're talking about here are courses that originated really around 2008 to 2013. And at the time, this was really new and a novel idea. And it was so new and novel that people had really hefty expectations. This modality was seen as something that was going to solve every issue in higher education, no matter kind of whatever your main issue was, the main problem that you saw, somehow a MOOC was going to solve it, right? These are open courses, open meaning typically free of charge, open to anyone who has the technology and the internet bandwidth to be able to log on. And they span a number of topics, things that we would think of as sort of typical post-secondary courses, as well as things more around personal development, leadership, and that sort of skill set. So along the way, in the 10, 15 years since these started, the understanding has changed a little bit. And there's definitely a set of common critiques that we see about these types of courses. And so those really originate with this idea of completion rates. So we see really not a large number of learners who start the course necessarily finish courses to what we would think of as the conclusion of the course material. We see some critique around this being sort of paternalistic, thinking about Western institutions spreading their knowledge and epistemologies around the world, some concerns around profit and privacy as third-party platforms come into play as well. And along the way then, we've started to see more and more that that's where the conversation goes. We see headlines like these talking about MOOCs as depressing and disheartening. Inside Higher Ed has sort of a past tense obituary about this model. And so my background is in the study of higher education. And those of us who study higher ed, the field generally, I would say, is a little skeptical of this model. And so we have this really prevalent consensus among not only scholars of higher education, but among the press and sort of popular media as well. I would say that MOOCs failed. They didn't live up to those really lofty expectations that were set. They didn't solve every issue of access at the outset, right? But at the same time, we have millions of learners around the world every single year who take these courses, and in fact, take multiple of these courses and tell us that they're really satisfied with their experience. And so there's a disconnect there, and that tension is where this study is situated, trying to better understand what is happening in between these two boxes. And so what we know at this point is that learners in these courses certainly are not one monolith, right? This is, given the nature of enrollment, given the nature of availability of these courses, this is not something where every learner comes in with the same goal, the same attributes, the same preparation. And so we have to understand learners' intentions and learners' goals for their enrollment in the course in order to be able to understand what success looks like. This is really different from the traditional model of post-secondary education that we think of in the US, where success is defined by the institution, or in some cases by the government. Here, it's defined by the learners. They have a lot more agency. And so we have to understand what that goal is at the forefront. Most of the research that we see is really heavily quantitative in nature. So thinking about these being online technology-based courses, there's a lot of data that's generated. So that data tends to be what's used to understand the experiences. And we also know quite a lot about barriers to these courses. So again, thinking technology resources, financial, other resources, and time as a resource as well. So that's what we know. And what is less clear is, why do people take these courses and what do they gain? That's what we're trying to answer in this study. And so today I'm going to talk through our work to try and understand those questions in these ways. So we'll start with a really sort of novel in this space theoretical lens that we're using coming from economics to understand the impact of this type of course. We'll talk briefly through the study design and methodology. And the bulk of this time today will be spent talking about what learners told us and hearing specifically from learners, their stories of, again, why they take these courses and what they get out of them. But at the outset, I'm going to give away the ending a little bit and ask you to hold in mind this key finding. And this is kind of the overarching, if we had to sum up this whole study in one sentence, this is what it would be. We found that these courses can empower people to do three things: imagine, explore, and create lives that are happy, safe, and fulfilling. And that was remarkably true around the world, and it was true across the lifespan. This was really consistent for every single person that we talked to. And so I'm going to ask you again, keep this in the back of your mind. And as you're hearing from learners, think about where you're seeing that idea of imagine, explore, and create happy, safe, and fulfilling lives fitting into what they're telling us. So our research questions guiding the study first were, how do learners around the world define their intentions and successes? Again, if we want to understand what success looks like, we have to understand how learners are defining it. From there, what contributes to learners' successes as they defined it? And then after the course, what are they doing with what they learned? What has the outcome been for learners? So this study used a theoretical framework I mentioned coming from economics called human capabilities. And this is Amartya Sen's work. Sen is a professor at Harvard University, Nobel Prize-winning economist. And the theory here really focuses on well-being and what we do around the world in any different setting to enhance both individual well-being and community well-being. And it is distilled down to these three ideas that we'll talk about today. The first being functionings. So at an initial level, this is, what are the goals that we individually choose to value? What matters to us as individual human beings? And then from there, capabilities are the skills and attributes that we have that allow us to pursue those goals, and importantly, pursue them in our context, where we are with who we are. And then lastly, stepping out one step further here is agency. So the idea that we have the freedom to apply these capabilities, to enact those choices, to pursue those goals. And so if we hold all three of those together, what we see in Sen's work is that education is really positioned as a meaningful end in and of itself in enhancing human capability and enhancing well-being. And so often, particularly in the US, we think about higher education in terms of career preparation and advancement. We think about it in these economic terms that are sort of financial in nature and in terms of stability. And Sen, as an economist, says, no, it's not just that. It's not that it isn't that, but it's not only about that. There's also this room to think about how we are enhancing well-being, how we're thinking about flourishing. And so this has also been applied to community college learners and some past work as well. So we started with this idea of human capabilities. What if we looked at MOOCs as being something that enhances well-being? And so the way that we gather our data was to talk to people this spring, and we spoke with 70 people around the world, making this one of the largest qualitative studies of MOOC learner experiences. And those people were remarkably diverse. They were really across the lifespan from ages 18 to 79 in 27 countries on every continent but Antarctica. And we talked with people who represented nations that had at least 1% of the total population of learners in University of Michigan MOOCs. So every country that had at least 1% of that population had individuals invited to speak with us. And so the way that we gathered or recruited people to talk with us is through this. So at the top level here, first, we had 130,000 people as of last winter who had completed a post-course survey of their experiences. And so on that survey, given our research questions asking about goals and success, 90,000 people told us that they had met their goals for the course. And so we winnowed it down to that group. From there, 17,500 people said that we could contact them for future research. And then of that group, 16,000 represented, again, that idea of at least 1% of the national representation in the learner pool. And so from there, we used a stratified random sampling technique to try and mirror national representation in the learner pool to our participant pool. So what I mean by that is, for example, if residents of India represent 30% of the total pool of learners in University of Michigan MOOCs, we tried to have 30% of the people that we talked to be from India as well. So ultimately, we talked again to 70 people. And these are the countries represented in this study. And they're listed here in frequency order. So the most frequent, starting with the United States and heading then to Turkey at the end. So what did people tell us? So we're going to talk through these findings in a few ways. For each one, I'll give a few examples from the data and from what learners told us, but certainly keep in mind, this is a massive amount of data. And so every learner that you're hearing from, picture 4 or 5 more people having these same things that they told us. So first, thinking about functioning. Again, the goals that we choose to value as individuals. We talked first to an undergraduate student in India in her 20s. And she talked about this in terms of COVID. And she said, yeah, Coursera offered free courses to people in India due to the surge of COVID at the time. And I was feeling purposeless. I was unclear what I was doing with my life because I had several family members who had died due to COVID. And I wasn't sure why I was living. And I really needed positivity in my life, but not toxic positivity. I needed something real I could hold on to, and online means were all that was available at the time. And so when we asked her to speak a little more about that sense of positivity and what she got out of the courses, she said, yeah, it gave me a purpose. There's an assignment at the end of the course, right? What do you want to do in the next 6 months? What do you want to achieve? That felt like I'm doing something to do better in my life. It made me feel much better. It helped me in interviews in college. I use the word purpose in my interviews now. I didn't think I was that good in finance, but no, I see that as my purpose now. So again, she goes on to talk about this idea of purpose coming out of the course, that it's not only skills-based, right? But this sense of purpose, of understanding who you are and what you contribute to the world. We also spoke to a gentleman in his 40s in Greece, and he talked in similar terms about his course, which was a technical course. It was very skills-based. And he said multiple times that the course truly changed the course of my life. I really sincerely believe that. And so we asked him to elaborate on that a little bit more. And he said, well, the pandemic made everyone consider the course of your life, creating new options for your life, new ways to move ahead. But also you have too much free time and you start to discover yourself and you start making peace with your own demons, wanting to create something new for yourself. Grief is a dire situation right now, really since 2010. And my first thought was to learn something so I could emigrate somewhere in search of a better life. And the course was a tool to do that. But close to my heart from the course is that particular attitude. You can do it if you just try. That was a big lesson. Someone working for 20 years can easily forget that. So he goes on to talk about how he's using these skills at work and did achieve some career advancement through this as well. But the bulk of our conversation was around this sort of deeply personal idea of the course of your life. And so one of the findings from our study is that specifically relating to COVID, the pandemic gave people time. And it's not to say that it was a positive thing, certainly, but it gave people time to think about who they were, what they valued, and what they wanted to do when this sort of forced pause was over in their lives. And so MOOC became a way that was low risk, both financially, but also thinking from a health standpoint in the pandemic. It was a low risk way to explore and try one of these new careers or a personal interest in the face of a major stressor for all of us. So secondly, then, thinking about capabilities. So again, some would describe these as the skills and attributes that we have or that we gather that allow us to pursue our goals in our contexts. We spoke with a gentleman in Virginia who was a newspaper production manager. He's in his 50s. And the first question we asked was, oh, what's your occupation? He said, coincidentally, I'm starting a new job on Monday. I took Python for everybody and web design for everybody, and it really did help. I was a production manager for a newspaper, but I started out as a graphic designer. And on Monday, I'll be a technical implementation specialist for the company that builds the tools to build the website for our newspaper. And sort of, joking, he says, yeah, I've been looking to expand because I was in the print industry and it's obviously kind of dying. So when we asked him what helped him successfully achieve his goals for the courses, he talked about his options and the alternatives that he saw. He said, I looked at going back to college again, but it's so expensive. I'd taken classes with Udacity and edX, but those are harder and more expensive. I like the format of Coursera a lot more. And Python for Everybody was great. He speaks of the instructor of the course and specifically that he's good at explaining things for newbies. It was a great course. And he says, I wouldn't be able to go into this job without that background. I wouldn't have been qualified. I mean that bottom line. So this idea of, again, cultivating skills to achieve the functioning, to achieve those goals that you value. We also spoke similarly with a data scientist at the CDC. And she told us that, in fact, one of the courses was being used by the CDC as the sort of foundation of a data boot camp that multiple people trying to advance their skills in the face of the pandemic were taking. And she says, oh yeah, I don't know if anybody actually ever told the university, but that course is featured on our data bootcamp pipeline. I'm intentionally layering upon it. And our data science team completed it by building on that course. And so now we have our first products and we're looking around the agency to find data to merge with it. And it's a huge thing. I wouldn't have progressed as fast if I hadn't completed that class. But now we're using data science skills to take a look at these longer term outcomes, disparities around case rates, hospitalizations, vaccination, testing, mortality, and trying to get a big picture view. We're able to use surveillance data to tell the stories of health disparities and COVID now in a comprehensive narrative. And so we asked her to say more about that. Like, what was it about this format that worked? Why is this the thing that the CDC was using? And she said, I probably could have gotten this content elsewhere, but not in this format. And the format really mattered for us to be able to learn. She talked at some length about how obviously busy she had been for the last couple of years. And she said, I could go in and I could watch a video for 15 minutes and then I could be pulled away to do something else that needed to be done and then come back when I was able. There wasn't necessarily a penalty there or needing to get caught back up to speed when you come back to the course, given that modularity. And then we also talked to a graduate student in aerospace engineering in Brazil who lives in a small city in the state of Sao Paulo. And he was back home with his parents during the pandemic, so didn't have the same technical resources that he would have had he been staying on campus. But the university that he attends has a partnership with Coursera. And he talked about, yes, students have access to these courses that you have already. And last year during COVID, I was taking online courses, schedule was more flexible. He gave me the proficiency needed for developing my research in Python And he talked at some length about an aerial ethic model that I will say just went completely over my head and is not my area of expertise at all, but it sounded really cool and important. And then he went on, though, to say really quite eloquently some concerns that he had. And he talked about that idea of epistemic hegemony, the idea that, what we're saying here, what we're doing, you seem to be speaking to US undergraduate students, but your courses reach beyond the US, mostly beyond the US, and like get more democratic in your examples and representation. There are examples that are more relatable to people outside the US, Latin America, Southeast Asia. Not only that, but make some recommendations of local sources of information. Some book that's written in Spanish or a famous teacher or lecture in those topics from another country. These topics and getting local sources, you can show that they exist, right? Not just focusing on US sources. And so the finding here is sort of two sides of a coin. First, we learned in multiple cases and multiple ways that MOOCs are offered in manners that we may not even be aware of at the institution to supplement formal structured educational programs. And that was true in the example of the CDC, but also some national post-secondary systems as well. And what's really key to making that work is that modularity, the idea that the CDC data analysts and others talked about, that I can step in when I have the time and step out when I need to. But what's important is that we start thinking or continue thinking more fully about how we make space for other kinds of knowledge. How are we honoring the fact that the majority of our learners are not in the US? And what does that mean that we need to change or adjust in order to keep seeing this use, particularly thinking about the fact that, again, national post-secondary systems are using these courses. So then let's talk about agency. So this, again, Sven would say is the ability to apply our capabilities. So this is where we're pulling all of this together so that we can apply those skills that we have or have cultivated and make choices that we value. Someone in California told us that she was working toward a degree in social work. She had been in IT her whole career. The pandemic gave her some pause. She decided she wanted to do something that felt a little more altruistic. And she said, as a working professional who's doing a career change, the whole program option, it's really, I would use the word innovative, but I'm trying to think of the right word for me. It was relieving to find it. It felt like something that I could tiptoe my way into instead of being like, oh, I have to quit my job and stop working and do a degree program. This was something that I could move into slowly so that I can make sure it was a good fit for me. And so she's talking here about a course that's an introductory social work course that can then lead to a master's in social work through the university. And that idea of being able to tiptoe into it was really salient for her. We probably the most fascinating interview from a technical standpoint was we talked to a cruise ship captain while he was at sea. And he says, I've been in this industry for 23 years. When we had the pandemic, we remained stuck on board ships all over the world. And I decided to start studying more for my personal knowledge, to be able to one day move on to a land-based job. I believe knowledge is power, right? The more you know, the better it is. The more you know, the better you can keep up with that. So I'm looking for more expertise and knowledge for a future application, a different kind of job. I mean, I have an amazing job, I know, but in this atmosphere, I want to be able to find something on land, closer to my family. And his family was in Europe. And so he was, really not only at sea, but quite far away. And it was difficult to be seeing his family even when he had time to do so. We spoke with a person in Ghana who talked about the skills that he gained from the course, helping lead to, again, this idea of agency and making decisions. It was a year after the course was over. And he said, when we asked if he still thought that he had achieved his goals for the course, he said, absolutely. That formed the basis for a lot of things to happen for me in my life. And he works for the African Union. And specifically, what he's doing is building an app for the African Union's Commission on Human and People's Rights, where if you, essentially, if you feel that your rights have been violated, you can use this app to make that report rather than having to travel to what had been the in-person location. And so he talked a lot about these skills that he gained and the importance of that work that he's doing. But what he also said was, that formed a very great basis for me. But one thing it did more, I wanted to build my confidence and my courage. And it did exactly that for me. So it did a lot. Whenever I sit back right now and I think back, I see it as something I would not have been able to achieve. That is taking this job with the African Union. I would not have been able to achieve that. I would not have been able to achieve who I am, what I am today, if I had not taken that course. And so here, the way we sum up this idea is that, again, kind of two sides of a coin. For learners, what we see is that MOOCs provide really direct, timely, immediate access to skills and knowledge that allow them to consider a larger set of possibilities and a more expansive view of their capability, their capacity, the things that they can do in their life. But when we think about what MOOCs can do for institutions, if we think about this as an institutional level, MOOCs provide colleges and universities an opportunity to demonstrate some of these really sort of moral foundations of our work in higher ed. The idea that education is a human right, the idea that education advances flourishing. We see evidence of that throughout these 70 interviews that we conducted. And so I think there's some space here not only to think about what learners are getting out of this, but what institutions can do with this understanding. And so lastly, another idea that we had, and in some ways sort of separate from Sen's work, we started, the more that we talk to people, to realize that there are some similarities to the way people talk about and use MOOCs to the US community college sector. And so, for example, a retiree who worked for the federal government, she identifies as a woman, and she said that the course she took spanned my academic knowledge and background. It allowed me to get into areas I'd been reluctant to touch, because part of it is, we go through high school and we get into college and we have these ideas about what we're good at. And I really thought, and this was a high school experience, that I wasn't good in math. And she goes on to say, I'm at the older generation. That's kind of what we weren't expected to be. It happens to a lot of girls, women. We get the impression we're not very good in math or sciences. So for me, this was an opportunity to touch those areas I hadn't touched and actually find them really quite interesting. She goes on to also say, I'm not just checking a box like I was when I took physics in college. It's just good to have an expansion of knowledge. I just want to have an expansion of knowledge. And it's a public service if you reach these retired people, because I think people are really concerned sometimes about still having intellectual challenges. You can do crossword puzzles and Sudoku, but it's not quite the same. And you can only do those for so many hours of the day. So for me, it's been a great solution. Also, dementia runs in my family. There's that genetic factor you're working against. And so, of course, intellectual stimulation is another thing that can help you there too. We also spoke to a coder, a data coder in the Netherlands, who told us along the way that he never had any formal education after elementary school. He was entirely self-taught in his career. And so one of the common questions we asked everyone was, did you use any resources from outside the course to help you complete the work? And he said, yeah, I don't know about help. I'm interested in this stuff. And what I do is I like to get more exercises or books or whatever, but that's the way I've been educated. This is my chance to get myself a proper education. It was always by myself. I would gather the books and then teach myself. And so when we asked him, what helped you achieve the goals you had for the course, he talked about some differences with other institutions' courses. And he says, above those, they attract you to it through some bonding, which is for the European very important. That's what makes the difference between Michigan and other universities. It becomes sort of a family feeling. It starts with the teacher. Even something like they start the courses with a video saying "Go Blue." They make you feel like you belong to something. And so we have lots of these narratives of the ideas that people across the lifespan use MOOCs in ways that are really similar to the ways that people across the lifespan use community colleges in the United States. And so if we wanted to think about what might be a better way for us to contextualize and understand the benefits and challenges of this sector, we might use a mental concept of a community college and see if there are some parallels there. And so here's what I'm talking about specifically. We think about community colleges certainly as not being focused necessarily on retention and completion metrics as the overall picture of success, similar to what we've heard about MOOCs. We think about a broad access mission at the core. We think about the opportunities for lifelong learning, personal intellectual enrichment, like the retiree in Virginia who didn't want to do any more Sudoku. We certainly see vocational skills and immediate applicability of career skills. Also, this idea of taking some foundational courses, either for credit down the line or as preparation for formal academic work. And then also this idea of flexibility. Colleges and universities don't move very fast, and curricular evolution doesn't happen very fast. And so there's some room here that MOOCs could be the space where large institutions are able to adapt to those emerging needs for a new technology or new training in much the same way that when, for example, a factory shuts down in a community, the local community college often is the first place people turn, and they can spin up a retraining program and an upskilling program very quickly. So we see that there are perhaps some options here for four-year institutions to look at MOOCs as an arm that can be that sort of rapid moving piece. So some things to keep in mind as you're thinking about the findings here. So as I said, these are success stories. We've got to think about who the people are that wanted to talk to us. So again, if you think back to that triangle and how we sort of funneled down who we spoke to, given our research questions, we only talked to people who told us they got what they wanted out of the course. We didn't necessarily hear from people in this study at this time who didn't have that. We also did not control for the courses that learners took. And so you may have noticed along the way, a lot of the people you heard from came from Python courses or other sort of coding, data science, technology courses. That's because that tends to be a large share of the enrollment of Michigan's MOOC. And so think about that. Additionally, we conducted all of the interviews in English and forewarned people during the participant recruitment phase that we would be conducting the interviews in English. And so certainly that leaves some stories behind. So I'm going to pause here and then we'll open it up for questions. But again, this is that overarching idea that I'm hoping you heard throughout each of these stories, which is that we found that MOOCs can empower people to imagine, explore, and create lives that are happy, safe, and fulfilling around the world and across the lifespan. And here are three examples of what I mean. So on the left, an example of that idea of a happy life, we spoke with a doctor who said, in the middle of the pandemic, I was having a terrible time on the front lines. I needed to get my head out of it, and data science was a hobby, but I decided to pursue it. And I started my MBA. And she told us that she, on her break time, rather than taking a nap or whatever her colleagues were doing, she would head to her car and pull out her phone and log into her course and just turn her brain in a different direction. We also spoke from a safety standpoint with a refugee from Kyrgyzstan who was living in the Netherlands. And he said, to find a job here is almost impossible, but the Organization for Refugees in the Netherlands shared these courses, and now I have skills to start a programming career. And he talked about what that was going to lead to in terms of the future for himself and his family. And then again, from that idea of fulfilling, we heard from the retiree who said, I was told I wasn't good at math. And this was a chance to fill in those places where I've been reluctant to take courses. So again, I will stop there and look forward to the conversation.